When students harass other students on your bus, doing nothing is always the wrong response. Hello, I'm Peggy Burns. As a school lawyer, I specialize in training bus drivers on the legal responsibilities of their job. One of these responsibilities is addressing student-to-student harassment on the school bus. When I started my first career as a teacher a long time ago, we didn't talk much about student harassment. Back then, we might occasionally worry out loud about bullying, teasing, and that sort of thing, but certainly not as a matter for the courts. Current events, research reports, and judicial opinions help us focus on the real issues. When students bully and harass others on the school bus, it's not just another part of student conduct. Rather, harassment is a potential barrier to learning, and it's more apparent than ever that these behaviors can also become serious legal issues. There are several important aspects of student-to-student harassment you must know, and a range of responses you might make. In this training session, you'll learn to recognize student harassment, and you'll know your responsibilities when it takes place on your watch. And with that knowledge, you'll have the confidence to act. And it bears repeating. Doing nothing is always the wrong response. You must take action. Now, I'm betting that you've already heard and seen elements of student-to-student harassment on your bus. You might be aware that students are spreading rumors about another student on the bus. I'm talking about nasty messages that begin at school, like, you know, the only reason he's with her now is she puts out. That's the reason he broke up with me. Are you picturing a middle school girl? I am too. Frankly, they're masterful at those kinds of rumors, aren't they? But in truth, mean and hurtful gossip can happen at any age, and even very young students can be victims of it. You might hear students calling each other names, perhaps names that they hear in their music or even in their homes. You may be so used to hearing their language that just like them, you've practically come to accept it. But silence can seem like permission, so don't hesitate to speak up. It could be language that's a put-down, maybe with sexual overtones. Or you might hear language that targets a student's race or religion, or is just plain demeaning and intended to be. Harassment does not feel good. It's not what compliments or friendly kidding around are made of. You might get information from your supervisors or school administrators that a student has a prior disciplinary history related to harassment. If you do, you may be on notice of the possibility of repeated situations. That's also true, of course, if you've witnessed examples firsthand of behaviors that are harassing behaviors by particular students on your bus. Sometimes you'll see a student pinching or touching or restraining another student during the loading or unloading process or in your rearview mirror. You may notice graffiti or other so-called artwork or drawing on the bus or on a student's books or papers. You may see objects such as a hangman's noose or a swastika or other threatening or intimidating items. You might see conflicts between friends, maybe even good friends that wind up in attacks about sexual orientation or racial name-calling, and suddenly those good friends look a whole lot more like enemies. These are all examples of student harassment that can happen at any time on your school bus. Maybe you've been unsure what to do and decided that, when in doubt, doing nothing was best. I don't want you to make that choice again. That's the one choice that's never the right choice. In my experience, drivers can be very anxious about anything that has legal overtones. I'm going to encourage you to be less nervous about the subject of harassment. Why? Because your basic common sense and good judgment are really your guides to action. I'm going to help you react to student harassment in ways that are legally sufficient. That's important. The basic expectation is you'll be aware of what's going on around you and take appropriate action. The rule here is this: you're required, quite simply, to respond to harassment in the same reasonable, common-sense manner as you would to other kinds of serious misconduct. We're going to talk about sex first. I'm thinking you're awake now, but I didn't mean that kind of sex. I meant gender. I mean conduct based on someone's gender or sexual orientation, or what others perceive to be their sexual orientation, that just plain hurts. And what's important here legally is how the victim feels about the conduct. It's not about what's in your mind or what your beliefs or thoughts are. This class isn't about sensitivity training for you. It's about what you must do to carry out this important aspect of a safe ride for all students. Sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. It can include unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal, nonverbal, or physical activities. Now, I'm not referring to developmentally appropriate behavior, like the hand-holding and gazing into one another's eyes that goes on among children who are discovering first love. Here are the facts from a real court case. I'm going to change the names to protect the innocent. Day after day, a girl who rides the school bus, we'll call her Have a Heart, is both verbally and physically abused by a boy on the bus. We'll call him Dewey Dare. Hava is convinced that the driver is aware of all of this. Now, it's true, she hasn't told the driver or anyone else because she's sure that Dewey and his friends will just make life harder for her at school. The driver either can't do anything or he won't. He lets everyone move around and get out of their seats, and that's when Dewey touches her and says things that scare her. Hava used to be engaged in learning and happy to be in school. Now she's become withdrawn and sullen in class. Her grades have dropped and her attendance is terrible. You can easily imagine that Hava feels pretty helpless. If she's right and the driver knows about the harassment, his passive behavior is just plain wrong. But let's say he's not really specifically aware of Dewey's behavior toward Hava. An out-of-control bus doesn't always lead to harassment, but any way you look at it, this driver shouldn't have tolerated the student's rambunctious behavior. Sexual harassment can quickly become a major safety concern on the school bus. As you've seen from the story of Have a Heart and Dewey Dare, it can be accompanied by other conduct issues that are quite visible. but it can also be more subtle and less obvious. In such situations, your awareness might come from reports from students, parents, or others. No matter what, sexual harassment can have a terribly negative impact on a student's school experience. And don't let the fact that either student is quite young fool you. Sexual harassment can happen early in a child's life. There is no specific age when it can begin. Sexual harassment is only one of the kinds of harassment that is prohibited by federal law. When words or conduct fit into the categories of race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, disability, gender, and sexual orientation, they're especially serious, legally speaking. There's a fairly simple legal standard to follow. When you know, or you should know, that such harassment is occurring, you must take action. Let's talk about what kind of action that is. It begins with thinking about what's unique about the school bus. I started out by saying that this training session would provide information about student-to-student harassment. But the fact is, you already know a lot about your bus that will help you identify harassment and suggest answers to what you should do. You know that the yellow bus is different from lots of other educational environments. And it's not just that it's on wheels and weighs more than 10,000 pounds. There may be only one supervisor on the bus, you, and your eyes must be on the road. You may not have thought of it this way before, but students are essentially confined to their seats, and I'm not talking about seatbelts or safety vests, with no real means of escape. They're expected to stay seated throughout the ride. After all, what will you say to students if they get out of their seats to tell you that something's going on?
Sit down.
That's right, you're going to tell them to sit down. And for most riders, if they don't take the school bus, they won't get to school. That means if a student is being harassed on the school bus, he or she may not be able to avoid it. All that applies to school buses in general. But lawsuits aren't about school buses in general, and you don't want them to be about your bus. So let's get down to specifics. Maybe you've had students come to you at the end of the ride to complain about the behavior of other students. When that happens, don't let it go by without thinking about what's behind their words, what they're trying to communicate. They may not use the word harassment, but their message may suggest behavior that requires investigation. You need to ask who, what, where, when, and how questions, like, who's doing that? What exactly has she done? Where were both of you when that happened? When does that behavior go on? How does he look at you or talk to you? And how do you feel about that? The information you gather increases your ability to report accurately when you need immediate assistance.
Your location and what's the problem?
I'm not suggesting that every conduct violation that you write up means there's sexual harassment or any other kind of harassment going on. But sometimes other behavior issues can mask a serious problem.